There's nothing more difficult for people to violate a social structure which all participants have initially accepted. It reminds me of a situation that once occurred in South America. I was in an airplane. The pilot came into the plane. He was drunk. He was reeling toward the cockpit. Passengers looked at each other, but no one got up. No one said to the pilot, "You're drunk, we can't fly in this plane." There are a set of pressures that keep you in the role that you've initially accepted.
What pressures would keep a friend from calling for help even when it was a matter of life and death? In 2005, 4 fraternity brothers watched and did nothing to help as their close friend, 21-year-old Matthew Carrington, died in front of them.
I live with the consequences of behavior for the rest of my life. My actions killed a good person.
Nothing I can say here today will bring back Matthew Carrington or lessen the grief that his family feels.
His death was preventable, and I will live with the guilt for the rest of my life.
Why did these 4 boys do nothing?
Every time I think about it, the feelings rush back, and the idea of what if just stands there in the corner, just not leaving. It's always there. I had no doubt that if I would have known what I know now, that I could have stopped it.
This story is not unique, but it raises a question. Is there something in human nature that can keep us from helping? In 1964, 38 New Yorkers watched through their windows as one of their neighbors was brutally murdered. Her name was Kitty Genovese, a 28-year-old woman.
The Genovese incident, where a young woman coming home late at night from her work was assaulted by somebody who was one of those random, crazy people.
Kitty was running up the block, and Winston Moseley ran after her until she reached the midpoint of the block, almost directly under this street light. Moseley caught up with her and stabbed her 4 times in the back. Her screams were loud, unmistakable, and reverberated throughout the entire area.
Lights went on in the windows around the courtyard, so we know that people were seeing this. Nobody called the police.
Somebody who lived on the 7th floor opened his window and yelled out, "What's going on down there?" When Moseley heard somebody yelling out, he ran back to his car. Kitty was still alive. She managed to get up. She staggers around the corner here, still screaming. People in that building heard her as well, and she collapses inside this hallway. There's one apartment above there. It was occupied by Carl Ross. Carl opened his door at the time that Moseley returns, and he saw the second attack taking place. And he did nothing.
After stabbing Kitty another 8 times in this very hallway, the killer ran away, leaving Kitty to bleed to death. Eventually, a neighbor called the police, but it was too late. Kitty died before the ambulance could get her to the hospital.
That shocked the city. Now, it's not that a person got murdered that shocked the city. That happens, sadly. It's that a person got murdered and her neighbors watched and nobody did anything. Bibb Latney and I, we read about the murder, as did everybody else. Here we were 2 young social psychologists starting our research careers. We knew about Stanley Milgram's set of experiments on obedience to authority. And we started to think about, in an offhand way, what could have produced the Genovese effect.
Perhaps Kitty Genovese might have been alive today if fewer people had seen her.
There were perhaps 38 people who could have responded, but each were looking to see what these other people were doing.
We decided to try to create a relatively ambiguous situation in which we could see how people responded. We thought that one kind of thing that comes up that's often hard to tell whether it's a real emergency or not has to do with fire.
You see smoke coming through the vent, and it is ambiguous. What do you do?
There's smoke coming out from under the door in that room where I was filling out the questionnaire.
Almost everybody does that if they face the smoke alone. Now let's have you face the smoke with two strangers. One person can be seen glancing at the other. The other is continuing to fill out the questionnaire. It's getting a little more smoky in the room, but nonetheless, you stay in the room. By and large, people surrounded by people who react as if there's nothing wrong don't respond. Everybody sees the other people not reacting, so they create a definition of the situation. No emergency.
To test their theories about how groups and individuals respond differently to a crisis, Darley and Latane conducted a second experiment. This time, the emergency was clearly defined.
First of all, I would like to thank the two of you for being here today to help out in the study.
In this experiment, one student was asked to communicate via intercom with another student down the hall.
If somebody, give me a little help here, because I'm having a problem. I've got one of these things coming on.
What sounded like a real seizure in the subject's headphones was just a tape recording of an actor playing a role for the experiment.
If somebody would give me a little help, hello? Could somebody help?
If you knew there was nobody else but you to help, you got up, you opened the door of your room, and you headed off to find the person. On the other hand, if there were 3 or 4 other people present who you heard,
I would like to thank the 3 of you for being here today to help us with the study. We are interested in learning.
You are much less likely to respond yourself.
Somebody give me a little help here. I'm having a real problem right now. Help me out.
The responsibility any individual feels for helping is diffused when there are other people who could also help. So what can we say back to the bystanders in the Genovese situation? The first thing we can say, I think, is they got a bum rap. They were reacting the way that you or me might react in those situations. There have been many incidents like the Genovese incident since then, and there have been many incidents in which people who could help don't help.
The children are not professional actors. They agreed to participate in an unusual study. Wide with microphones and filmed from an observation point high across New York 6th Avenue, they will be sent out to ask a simple question. Will you help me?
Excuse me, I'm lost. Can you help me, please?
We are all creatures of socialization, and socialization is what teaches us to pay attention to what other people do when they're responding to a situation.
I can remember when I first heard about the study, Psych 1. I was like, wow, that is ridiculous. How could someone see something happening that they know is wrong, that they know the person standing next to them knows wrong, but not take an action? It's sickening to know that I took part in it, that I could have just been the one that stood up.
A makeshift memorial of flowers and candles is placed outside the Chi Tau fraternity house for Matthew Carrington. Police say the 21-year-old Chico State student was in the basement of this house taking part in a fraternity event at 5 a.m. Wednesday morning when his body gave out.
Matt didn't have to die that night. Could have all been so different. Could have all been from the very beginning when they were all down there, when there was a room full of guys. It went wrong before they all left.
Matthew Carrington joined a fraternity and was undergoing hazing during the spring semester of his junior year.
Pledge Class 2004. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And these are our little pledge brothers and shit right here.
He wanted to join because he would get to meet people. He's kind of shy, you know, networking and such when you're older. I mean, you've got brothers and houses in every college all over the country, so. They did some pretty silly things, more embarrassing than causing anybody any harm. Like wearing a mini skirt out in the intersection or switching your t-shirt with a homeless guy and putting his shirt on. But it was nothing that was gonna get anybody hurt.
Oh, isn't that sweet?
How did these seemingly harmless pranks escalate to the point where Matthew died?
Basically, it was the third night what the fraternity called Inspiration Week, what the pledges call Hell Week. The pledges, Mike and Matt, were brought into the basement, and the first thing they did was to undergo some grueling physical calisthenics. The young men were then given a 5-gallon water jug, which in itself weighed about 42 pounds, and were told to stand up on a narrow bench, stand on one foot, and to drink as much as they possibly could.
Matthew at some point became nauseated, vomited, became increasingly confused. The kidneys can only handle so much water, and indeed you can poison yourself.
When you're drinking water and you're acting drunk, okay, something's not right. You know? When you're slurring your words, when you're, you know, you can't manipulate things like you normally, something's wrong.
Gabriel Mastretti and J.P. Fickus came in at some point and they were both intoxicated. Mastretti was excessively intoxicated and they basically took over.
Actually, to tell you the truth, I don't remember most of it. Fortunately, I was pretty intoxicated when it happened. I remember making him do push-ups. I don't remember why.
Matt was at a point where he couldn't do any more push-ups. He just all of a sudden dropped, and it just seemed like his whole body just tensed up.
You've got, well, at this point, 4 boys down there. It just makes me sick that they didn't think. They didn't think something's wrong. So why can't someone say stop?
What could happen is if one person says, this guy is in real trouble, you call 911, you do this, you do that. Everybody will buy that definition, will start to react, will be helpful. The thing is balanced on a knife edge, but sometimes it falls and nothing happens.
His hips moved a little bit and he just seized up. And Mike said, oh my God, I think he bit his tongue. And then he said, somebody needs to call an ambulance. I was turning on my cell phone when I was not walking down the stairs and was typing in 911 when I saw Mike at the bottom of the stairs. I had it typed into my phone. All I had to do was press the green button. And he said, it's okay, you don't need to call 911. Matt's just sleeping. You know, I hit the red button and canceled it out. And he was snoring. It just sounded like he was snoring.
I remember that thoroughly. I remember the sound of him snoring. I remember thinking, no, he's sleeping.
The snoring was certainly not sleeping. It would have been a result of water intoxication and a pulmonary edema, which is basically the lungs filling with fluid. Approximately an hour after he had been left to sleep it off, he was not breathing.
They do nothing for an hour while they have him lay there. Then they realize he's not breathing. Then all of a sudden it's like, call 911. Well, God, at this point they do, but at this point now, it's too late.
Matthew was pronounced dead approximately 27 minutes after arrival in the emergency department.
When we got there, they took me and Debbie in the back, and we were still hoping that when they pulled that sheet over his head
it was going to be another kid, not yours. Just as bad as that sounds, there was just a chance it wasn't our son. And as soon as they pulled the sheet up and you seen his hairdo, you knew it was him.
And she's screaming, no, not Matt, not Matt.
The four ringleaders in the fraternity hazing and torture death of 21-year-old Chico State student Matthew Carrington accepted responsibility. All four, some through tears, pleading guilty.
Guilty.
Guilty, sir.
Guilty.
Guilty.
All four were given jail time. Most culpable, 22-year-old Gabriel Maestretti, sentenced to a year in jail for involuntary manslaughter. 25-year-old Jerry Lim and 19-year-old John Fickus sentenced to 6 months as accessories to manslaughter.
Matt trusted him to help him out if he was going to get in trouble, because he wasn't worried about getting into trouble with just drinking water. When it was time for help, they didn't step up, and he didn't get any help.
Nearly a year after Matthew's death, Debbie visits 3 of the 4 fraternity brothers who remain in jail, serving time for involuntary manslaughter.
I don't think they're bad kids. I think they just made bad choices and a terrible, terrible mistake, you know, that we're all going to live with for the rest of our lives.
It's just too hard. I start all my days crying for Matt because I just miss him so much. And I think of all of you guys. I think of the pain that you must be feeling, having to live with him.
For like the whole year, it was just one day being played over and over, that night being played over and over again in my head.
I find it hard to forgive myself. I don't know, it's like the only thing that makes me feel better is to like hate myself.
It's sad in of itself that you want retribution just so it can be over with.
What it's hard for us to realize is the power that situations have over us to cause us to act in certain ways. It was not the case that they had been horrible moral failures. It's the case that they're like the rest of us, caught up in situations, influenced by the situations, reacting.
I believe that there's all different kinds of people, and that a certain kind of people take charge in situations. Unfortunately for Matt, none of us were the type of person who took charge and told people what to do. We just found ourselves looking at each other, waiting for someone to step up, and nobody did.